Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com program, brought to you by Techstrong, Linode, and Akamai. My name is Cody J. Brown, the host of Techstrong Learning, and we have an exciting panel ahead. First, I need to cover just a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion, or maybe you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend, the on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session today. If you have any questions, and we really hope that you do, we want you to send those in to us using the Q&A tab, which can be found on the right side of your screen. Right next to that Q&A tab, you'll find a chat tab, and that's where we want you to get to know your fellow audience members. Let us know your thoughts throughout today's program, or maybe just from where you're tuning in. And of course, before we close out, we are giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so be sure to stick around for the duration of today's program. So the topic of today's discussion is the move to the distributed cloud, what DevOps expects from public cloud providers. I'm joined by Sean Michaels, Vice President of Product Management at Akamai, Veronica Carey, System Administrator, Technology Developer, and Linode Developer Advocate at Violet Sky, Talia Nassi, Lead Developer Advocate at Akamai. And helping to keep us on track today, we have Mike Rothman, Chief Strategy Officer of Techstrong Group and GM of Techstrong Research. So Sean, Veronica, Talia, and Mike, thank you all so much for joining me. Mike, do you want to get this conversation kicked off?
I do. Well, welcome everybody. Obviously, welcome to my esteemed colleagues and Cody. No, I'm just giving Cody a hard time on that front. But welcome everybody. We're here again to really kind of dig into what's happening on the cloud provider forefront, right? We have done some research with Linode now Akamai Linode for the last year. So what we're going to do is we're going to, kind of excerpt greatly from a report that we recently put together called The Move to the Distributed Cloud. So this is the third of the quarterly reports we're doing with Akamai Linode this year. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But before we kind of dive in, I guess it probably makes sense for us to introduce ourselves. So Sean, you want to start in terms of who you are, what you do, and again, what's interesting about the topic to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, my name is Sean Michaels. I am the Vice President of Product Management for Akamai's computing portfolio. I've been at Akamai for about 10 years and really looking forward to having a conversation about how we see the world evolving and how we see cloud platforms evolving to take advantage of the possibilities in distributed computing.
Great, thank you. Talia, why don't you go next?
Yeah, my name is Talia Nassi. I'm a lead developer advocate for Akamai. I'm focused on creating content that involves both Akamai and Linode. And I came from AWS, so thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. Welcome. And Veronica?
Hi, I'm Veronica Carey. I'm a technology developer, mainly working in legacy systems management and updating. So it's actually a lot of COBOL, which is very unique and interesting, and I think gives me some unique perspective on this too. I also do some content creation, including making videos, including for the Linode channel, which is fun.
Yeah, that's well, so thank you. Welcome everybody. And I'll let you in on a little known secret. It wasn't my first programming language, but my first professional programming job was actually in COBOL. So, I know what you're talking about there from the, the structured nature, and now you get all this C# crap and, Java and all this. I mean, sometimes just some good old school COBOL will, kind of get your logic juices flowing on that front. So as I had mentioned, I'm Mike Rothman. So I am general manager of Techstrong Research. I'm the principal author of the report that we've put together here. And just to, again, provide some context, we've been working with Akamai Linode actually for well over a year at this point. We did a survey back in 2021, and we've done quarterly surveys since then. We've got some trend data that we can go through that, again, really kind of starts to try to isolate why and how different cloud providers appeal to different constituencies within different customer environments. Again, I'm very pleased to have our panel here to dig in and start to kind of peel back the data on that front. So this is the report. Everybody's going to get a copy of the report when we kind of get done today. So we'll have a follow-up email. You'll get a copy of the report as well as the ability to ask questions and the like. So without further ado, let's jump in, right? So the movement to multi-cloud and alternative providers. So our first data point, drum roll, please, right? What percentage of your IT infrastructure will be cloud-based 1 year from now? And what we see is actually, it's not that interesting, right? Everything's pretty consistent there. Kind of was in the neighborhood of 55% back in 2021 and has been hovering between roughly, 78% and 75%, since then. So the conclusion I draw is cloud is a thing. And actually, I've been doing cloud in some way, shape, or form for close to 10 years, actually over 10 years at this point. So you don't have to convince me that cloud's a thing. I'm pretty sure that I don't have to convince anybody on the panel that cloud is a thing, but we've got some data that, kind of continues to focus on the fact that cloud is a thing. So I'd love to, get some perspective on that. Sean, you've been, obviously with Akamai for a while. Cloud is your thing. So yeah, that's pretty consistent. A lot of the discussions you've been having, folks continue to move their workloads, to the cloud. Is it as it makes sense? Do they need to do it because, we got to do cloud everything, or is it some combination of both?
Yeah, in terms of what we're seeing with our customers, we're seeing definitely a big migration to the cloud, even for the existing customers that have traditionally kind of kept their applications or kept their services on premise. The biggest reasons have a lot to do with things like cost savings. So moving to the cloud has the possibility, or at least has the promise, if done correctly, of being able to reduce kind of like your overall spend on your applications and on your services. And additionally, we're also seeing it as a way for people to kind of free up resources internally to be able to do more things. So the fewer folks I have kind of building my network and maintaining my network and building out network infrastructure, the more folks that I can actually hire to build and run applications. So just taking the onus of maintaining and managing infrastructure away kind of frees up time, frees up money, frees up headcount in order for businesses to focus on the core things that they do really well, whether it's a media company creating media applications or an e-commerce company, changing their application to tailor to their user base. It really lets them focus on the things that are germane to their business.
Yeah, you bet. And Talia, you had mentioned that you were with, AWS for a while prior to joining Linode. I've been working in AWS for, again, kind of 12, close to 13, 14 years at this point. I'd love to get some perspective from you on just, kind of the expertise and kind of the knowledge of the developers that you're working with on these different platforms. Can you contrast that to folks that were playing around 5 years ago versus what you're doing and what you're seeing now?
Yeah, I think now there's definitely a push for cloud from the start with companies, as opposed to, I think, years ago, it was kind of a cloud later approach, like let's build what we need to build and then maybe move it to the cloud later. And I think now a lot of companies and developers are starting to build in the cloud from the beginning. So they're kind of doing a cloud first approach. And then just echoing off what Sean said, I think you can also have like a hybrid cloud approach. If you still want to have like that control of on-prem, you can have a mix of both on-prem and cloud. So you don't necessarily have to do, every 100% of your infrastructure on the cloud if you still want to have some control of on-prem. So I think with each business need, it's going to be a little bit different, but I just wanted to point out, like moving and building to the cloud doesn't mean that 100% of everything is going to be on the cloud. You can still have that, the on-prem infrastructure if you need it.
Yeah, you bet. And from an interesting standpoint, we do a whole bunch of different surveys and polls of our audience. So, kind of the work we've done with Linode is, just one of the projects that we have in flight at any given time. And we do see a mix, right? In terms of folks that are what you would call cloud only, right, versus cloud native, right? And cloud only is, we don't have any infrastructure. We're not interested in that. That's just nothing that we're going to do at this point. It could be cloud first on that front, right? Cloud native is they really want the openness of, kind of those platforms, and, they're going to, opt for those technologies, where it is, whether it's in a public cloud platform, on their own private cloud, hybrid, what have you, a little bit different. And then there's, kind of that third category of folks that still have on-prem stuff. And then when you start to dig into that a little bit, it's really less about, religion, about, on-prem and I have, I got to control all that data. And it's much more about the fact that there's just some stuff that you can't move, right? And it just doesn't make sense to, kind of move those things. And Veronica, I know you're giving me the high sign there, because I guess a bunch of the applications that you specifically work on, do fit into that category of difficult, to move.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is that there are certainly some workloads that just cannot easily be ported to cloud. I know with me working in COBOL, one of those issues that I run into semi-frequently is the license terms, and the fact that the license might not permit cloud without, buying an additional support package and going through whatever vendor the compiler's vendor requests and requires. And that but even with that, I'm still seeing more of my stuff moving to cloud, just as I think people are working through that. I definitely think there's some advantages that are pretty apparent in things like portability, but also backup, restore, functionality, things like that, and just availability outside of a core network that so many of these programs seem to need.
No, yeah, I mean, and that really highlights the point that Sean made, right? Which is that a lot of organizations just don't want to be in that operations business anymore, right? Having to go and procure spindles, right? Or having to make sure that you've got, kind of the amount of compute that, you're going to require at any given time. Just and given some of the global supply chain issues we've had over the last 8 to 10 months, that's, if anything, created even more of an impetus for folks to, again, get out of that operational business of having to manage provision and monitor kind of their infrastructure and let somebody else do it. All right. So our next data point, right? Top reasons why respondents are considering adding one or more cloud providers. Number one on the list, right? 53%. We have to be less reliant on one or more cloud providers, right? Basically, they're saying they need multi-cloud because of resiliency, reliance, diversity, what have you, right? So have you guys seen that? I mean, obviously for the folks that are working with developers, do they even have an opinion about those kind of things at this point? And then obviously, Sean, love to hear, gosh, excuse me. Love to hear your perspective on, again, when you're talking to customers, how many of them are platformed on one of the big ones and they're looking because they don't want to be dependent on, kind of said big one, and the nuances of their environment. And you guys can just have a food fight about who goes first. I'm cool with that, whatever you guys want to do.
I'm happy to share the customer stories, and then maybe that gives some fodder to Talia and
go
from there. So I think we're seeing something really interesting, especially with the customers who've already kind of established a cloud footprint. So customers who are already there. What we've heard pretty consistently across our customer base and across the developers within our customer community is that the cloud and the big hyperscalers were great when they were just trying to make the initial move from taking an application and moving it from on-premise into the cloud. So lots of documentation, lots of functionality, lots of ancillary services that kind of stick to the IaaS capability. So I need VMs, I need kind of bare metal computational, I need an object storage solution, but in order to build an application, I also need identity and access management, I need a database. So there's lots of other things that you have to couple with that core infrastructure in order to actually get an application up and running. And what we've heard from our customers and from the developers is, hey, great to get up and going, but now I've been on the cloud for about 5 years, and now it's time for my next change and my next evolution. And I need to start thinking about how do I build in multiple cloud providers in order to do things like make sure that the system is up and reliable and prevent outages. I want to move to a multiple cloud provider environment because I want to keep my cloud provider honest and have some negotiating power when I go in for a contract, of which I have very little today when I'm trying to actually kind of create my my application. That goes into things like, how do I create costs and keep costs down? So really tied into the data. And the other one that I'm actually surprised that showed up in the data, but showed up a little bit lower, is this notion of, wow, I'm actually kind of running out of talent. Every time I bring somebody on board, I have to teach them the cloud. And I'll give you an example for one of the airline customers. So we were talking to a VP at one of the airlines of engineering, and he said, every time I bring in somebody and I bring up a developer, I have to make sure that they're cloud certified. And because I work for an airline, that means that they stay with me just long enough to become cloud certified and then go work someplace cooler. And so this notion that I think the alternative clouds bring, and I think what's really interesting, is that ability to manage infrastructure more easily without the bells and whistles, without the lock-in. So kind of the combination of the alternative clouds and infrastructure as code is really creating an environment where developers can start looking at how do I build applications in different ways in order to mitigate some of these issues. And so it's kind of I've been in the cloud, I've been there, I've locked in. Okay, now it's time for the next evolution. And I think that's where we're seeing our customers line up quite a bit to what the data in the report.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that, right? So certified, DevOps professionals, because, sometimes it's like, hey, 53%, that's an interesting one. But, it's also interesting sometimes to look and say, wait, only 8% say that, getting certified or talents and skills is, one of their issues. I mean, Talia, Veronica, I mean, are you seeing a whole mess of folks like, hey, they're lining up. You know what? Resources aren't a problem. I've got more people that I know what to do with. I don't see that, but maybe you guys do. I don't know.
I mean, I found it. Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I think it depends on the business needs of what you're trying to do, right? I think there's a lot of what Sean said. I've also noticed is that like the big three, the top three, like the hyperscalers, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, like they're all great in the beginning, like when you're first trying to, build in the cloud initially from the beginning. But then like things get a little bit more complex, with AWS, there's, over 200 different services that you can use. There's so many different configurations. There's so many ways to build where it can actually get to the point where it increases the complexity of what you're trying to do versus just focusing on your business needs.
Yeah. Veronica, did you want to add something to that?
Well, I was just going to add, I haven't personally done hiring or anything like that, but in talking with people who have done the hiring for some of these small, medium businesses, there are plenty of people with a cert on their resume, that I don't know that would necessarily weigh into people as a reason they would consider adding new. That being said, I definitely see the effects of the labor shortage just on my own, friends in the business and people I work with, and just finding talent in general. I don't know that the certification matters as much as just the talent in general.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the things that I've done in actually present life, right, not necessarily related to Techstrong Research, but I've built and maintained the cloud security curriculum for the Cloud Security Alliance. So one of my partners and I've done that. I've been teaching, cloud security for, again, probably 13 years at this point, in some way, shape, or form. And it's been interesting. So that question a little bit before about, kind of the sophistication of the practitioners. I mean, I can tell you because I'm teaching a lot of these folks. Yeah, I mean, the folks that would come to the classes, 10 years ago, I mean, they half of them didn't even understand like terminal or doing anything. I mean, they were just like, oh, is it Windows, right? And they're looking for the, drag and drop, interfaces and stuff. And now we get like DevOps folks or real programmers and, DBAs and a variety of these folks who are like, my stuff is moving to the cloud. I don't understand the infrastructure of this thing. Yeah, I could, set up my stored procedures and my, access lists and my encryption keys and transparent, data encryption, right? But I don't understand how it works, right? I don't understand how all this magic, happens. All of a sudden I just, do a clickety click and all of a sudden there's a database there, right? So you're getting just a different level of capability, right? A different level of understanding that's there. But Veronica, to your point, I can also tell you that there are a whole bunch of people that come out of my class and, they can spell cloud and they can walk through and we build WordPress in the cloud, and that's the big lab that we do. And, then they're cloud experts, right? Just ask them. So, buyer beware, like everything. I think buyer beware with a lot of these folks, but that was really interesting data that only 8% view that as a constraint, right? But to, kind of the other point, Talia's point about, just the different amount and number of services, right? 200 something, I want to say 260, 270 with AWS now, probably 160, 170 with, Azure. I don't run into a lot of folks that, kind of look at their bill month over month and go, wow, it's going down. Right. I mean, I just, you tend not to, look at it and go, oh yeah, well, I did great this month. Right. My bill went down. Right. So, I mean, how much are you guys seeing where cost is really, and I mean, complexity is one thing, right? But cost being I need to get better leverage. I need to be able to negotiate more. I need to, again, have more say in, what's happening on my platform because again, I can't keep, dealing with these cost increases. I mean, Sean, are you seeing that kind of stuff too?
Yeah, I think we see it. I think I'll put on my product manager hat though and say it's not cost, but it's value or price per performance. So the reality is kind of like what the Linodes of the world and what the DigitalOceans of the world have brought to the table is similar functionality, or excuse me, similar performance around those kind of major compute primitives at a kind of a higher or a lower cost price, creating value, right? One of the things that developers don't need is just kind of a low cost offering that degrades performance or degrades availability or anywhere impacts the application. So the trick to this game is figuring out how you develop or deliver developers the infrastructure and applications they need to at the same performance without kind of materially or while also kind of reducing the cost. And that is definitely one area that we're starting to see is one, just, hey, I need to bring my total overall cost down. I think the other thing that's really interesting, and I think that the alternative clouds or that Linode and a lot of the folks have done well, is the transparency and the simplicity of pricing. I have quite literally spoken to customers who have a team who do nothing but dissect their AWS bill. And to where it's that complicated where they don't understand where they're going to get charged. They don't know how to model what their future costs are going to be. So it's not even just a matter of getting the cost down, but also trying to make the cost transparent to where, oh, I spun up a VM. I know precisely what that's going to cost me versus a what the heck did this bill come from type of a situation as developers start to expand the applications they use within their within their cloud provider.
Oh, it's not just a team, Sean. There are actual huge software companies who all they do in life is, ingest AWS bills and help customers figure out what the hell they're paying for with pie charts. Right. I mean, and again, that's a thing. But when you're spending a couple $1,000,000 a month, with these cloud providers, I mean, that's probably worth spending on. Yeah. Great. All right. Next, what factors would you consider before moving all or part of your workload to a new cloud infrastructure provider? We hit on price performance before. More open infrastructure. Let's dig into that one a little bit, right? Because of course that's one of the things that Linode talks about is kind of the openness and the accessibility of the infrastructure. So when I say those words, right, more open infrastructure, how do you guys interpret it, right? When you're talking to customers, why are they saying, you know what, that makes great sense to me because I want to embrace? Is it this technology? Is it that, open source project? Is it, that legacy, kind of platform that I need to, deal with? So do you guys have any comments on, what the requirements are for customers relative to, open infrastructure?
I think part of this is like being locked into like one provider versus not being locked in. So like I think Linode does a really good job of like, when you build something in Linode, they make it kind of easy to move to other places. Whereas I think with like, Amazon or AWS or GCP, it sometimes they make it a little bit harder to move your workloads from one cloud to another, and that might stop people from building initially with Amazon or building initially with GCP.
A little harder.
Maybe a little more.
One thing I was thinking about with the more open infrastructure is just I'm seeing a little bit of a reaction against serverless and a reaction against some of these, a lot of organizations moved some workloads to serverless workloads, over the last couple of years, and then they're seeing some drawbacks from that. Control being one of them that I can think of, but portability being another one, where serverless stuff is very hard to move, and it feels less open. It feels like a closed ecosystem. It's like buying a car that you can't easily take to a repair shop, and that does lend itself to some challenges, I think, as a company.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and it's not because it feels or seems like a closed platform, Veronica. It is, right? Kind of code that you're going to run, that's built specifically for AWS Lambdas, not going to run as a Google function, right? It's not going to run as an Azure function. And I think that's a broader discussion around native services, right? And native tools. So if you're building, a specific routing tree in a cloud provider's DNS environment to auto route, or maybe using CDN capabilities within, kind of the cloud platform, those are rules that don't really translate to a new cloud platform there. And again, I think the reality is, and I applaud Linode saying, yeah, we want to be open. We want, folks to bring their workloads to us and take their workloads from us if they need it. Most other folks are like, kind of once they get the claws in you, right? They don't want to, let go for anything. And I think a big way that they do that is building to their interfaces, right? Be leveraging their native services, whether it's, get certificate management or secrets management or load balancing or, pretty much any of those kind of services that keeps you there, right? Because you've got to rebuild those capabilities on a different cloud platform. So I do think that there's, certainly something from a desirable nature of being able to move, your workloads much more freely. It's that balance, right? How much do I want to build myself within the infrastructure versus take advantage of the stuff that's, built within the cloud platform? I don't know, do the developers that you're, working with, have any, penchant on that, or again, a lot of developers are just like, oh, I can build it better than those guys anyway. Right. So maybe they just, kind of do that as a matter of practice. All right. So, well, we kind of beat that one to death a little bit. Color chart now, right? Needs versus wants. And this one I want to pick on two specific things, two different, areas here. One is this little chart. It's two columns that are, we're calling table stakes, right? And that's security, I'm old black, security capabilities, right? And granular identity and access management, right? So when we think about, again, and it really bore out the numbers, from a criticality standpoint, upwards of 90-something% for both of them said that it was, kind of, at least important, to have core security capabilities and kind of granular identity and access management. So that's table stakes. Really, what I want to focus on here is the two to the left, right? One is global computer infrastructure coverage, right? Global compute and infrastructure coverage, right? And large outbound network capacity, right? Because, yeah, and again, let me, kind of, and I'll give you the answer before that, right? But, there's obviously a thought that, if you take an interesting, kind of open cloud, platform and you kind of mix it or merge it or platform it on top of a very large global communications provider, there could be some leverage there. And I don't know, go figure, something like that. But that data kind of indicates that, that does become, one of the core differentiators, right? One of the core issues for why customers will move, to a specific alternate cloud provider. So Sean, was that the mentality when, kind of Akamai does, this deal, is that, we want to give global nature, we want to give global coverage, to a lot of these cloud, application platforms?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think there's actually kind of two things that pulled Akamai into the market in terms of how do we figure out how we identify or create a niche as we go into this kind of infrastructure as a services cloud piece. And that's kind of putting aside CDN and even security, but kind of focusing on how could we make our computing layer different. And so the first was we saw a need from our customer base for this notion of kind of a distributed compute platform or a distributed type of computing instance. So if you think about the way that like most of the edge computing works today, so things like Akamai's edge workers or Cloudflare's workers or the way Fastly kind of does computing at the edge, it's really designed for kind of lightweight, event-based, ephemeral, kind of in line with the CDN type of computing applications where I need to manipulate a header or I need to modify a manifest, but it's something that's kind of in line and lightweight. On the other hand, you have kind of the big, heavy data center approach that you see from the hyperscalers where, big, huge compute density, but in only a handful of locations. And what we started seeing from our customer base was a need for something in the middle. And something where, as they were breaking applications into their kind of into microservices and kind of deconstructing their monoliths, and even just some native applications that were currently running in different infrastructures, they're like, hey, Akamai, can we help? And one of the first examples was Apple came to Akamai about a year and a half ago with this application for Private Relay. So for those of you who don't know what Private Relay is, it's a way in the Safari browser to basically kind of stop other applications from tracking who you are, kind of by bouncing your traffic off a number of different proxies and IPs. And so this is an interesting application in that, one, it needs to be highly distributed because, users who are using Safari are kind of distributed all over the world. You don't want the latency of always having to go back to a big kind of infrastructure or a big kind of a data system. And things like workers were just too lightweight. Like you need more computational density than what you were able to get from kind of a workers type of implementation. And so Apple came to Akamai and said, hey, is this something that you could build for us? And as we kind of learned about that and as we kind of brought that to market, we had more and more customers asking us for those types of applications. So we heard about IoT-based applications. We heard some retail and banking use cases. We even heard some use cases from airlines who want to do things like, push compute close to a specific airport when there's a lot of cancellations so that the ticketing process or the rebooking process isn't so latent and isn't so bad for the people who are trying to get a new flight at the airport. So it's a really interesting type of an application and a really interesting type of use case. So that was kind of one that we saw. The second was this notion for large egress. This may seem interesting, but Akamai's second compute customer was actually a hyperscaler. So one of the hyperscalers came to Akamai and said, we have a workload that needs a ton of egress capacity. Needs about 20 terabits per second of egress capacity sustained for what they need to do for their application. And their feedback to us was, well, we can't really get that bandwidth out of our own data centers. So Akamai, if you kind of put compute on top of your CDN backbone, which is what we've done, is there a way to type of run our application on top of it? And so that's the other type of really interesting thing that we're seeing. And I always think it's funny that, hyperscaler was my second customer, but yeah. And so that's another type of application with these, like as we start to try to push data towards data and applications towards the edge in order to get performance, the amount of bandwidth and the connectivity you need between those locations also increases. And so these large egress type applications we see as kind of an emerging trend that really lend themselves well to the type of compute use case that we can handle.
Yeah, that brings up a really interesting, kind of reality of what is a cloud provider and
Yeah.
where are your applications actually platformed at any given time, right? Because
Yeah.
when you think about it, and a lot of the SaaS providers that we all use every day, right, they use a whole mess of different stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And they may say, and they may even be cloud providers themselves, yet they're the biggest, kind of consumer of alternative cloud services as well. So what customers are buying, right, tends to be some type of outcome or some type of technology value, back to your product management piece of it, Sean, on that, focusing on the value piece, but how those services are aggregated together, right, and brought forward to the market. There's a lot of different variation, in terms of that. And I think it's not just so simple to say, yeah, there are, X number of huge, market dominating hyperscalers, and there's, Y number of alternative clouds, and there is Z number. Listen, we're as guilty of this as anybody, right? We do the chart that says, who do you use? And these are the hyperscalers, and those are, but the reality is it's not that simple, right? And developers are going to build on the platforms that make their application work best. Right. And I think that's what we need to keep in mind, which is, yes, and especially from your standpoint, selfish standpoint, right? You want to make your platform most friendly and best for a lot of those specific uses. But the reality is, kind of, there's going to be a whole mess of different, kind of cloud platforms in there for obvious reasons. All right, we got a couple of questions that came in. That's good. So again, just another point. If you guys have questions, you can use the Q&A tab on that. I'm not sure I'm familiar with this. So Sean or Talia or Veronica, maybe is Akamai Linode working with any of the new MCN software providers? I'm not sure what an MCN software provider is. Maybe I'm just missing the acronym. Any of you guys know what that is?
I do not. But
okay.
Maybe Google does.
Yeah, maybe the Google. So we can look at that. We'll follow up with you, participant 472, whoever that is, on that. And then we have another one. So participant 18, thank you for your question. So you are providing bandwidth at the edge for edge computing use case. You know what? We can jump there now. That's obviously a point of discussion that we want to get to, because if you see all the way on the right, one of those emerging requirements, that's edge is another one of those. So Sean, you had kind of mentioned, workers and running kind of code much closer to the actual point of, usage of that data. So can you just kind of go in a little bit to, kind of what that means? And multi-cloud networking. Okay, we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah, so it's a great question. So one of the things that I like to talk about, which may seem weird from an edge company or a company who's rooted in history of the edge, is when I ask, and when people ask me to what should I think about when I think about edge computing, part of me says, well, I don't want you to think about edge computing. What going back to what you said is I want you to think about your application. And I want you to think that there are a myriad of different types of compute options that you could leverage based off of what you're trying to do with your application. So, for example, if I'm trying to build something like a big data warehouse, should I be building that on edge compute? No, you should not. You should be, something like a data warehouse should be going into kind of a traditional core system. Am I trying to build something like Apple with a private relay? Should I build that on the edge? Well, probably not, because it doesn't have the resource density. Am I trying to do something like A/B testing? Yes, you should do that on the edge. And I think what's really interesting is if I could tell a use case or a narrative, to me, what's interesting is in how all three of those things come together to actually create a single application. So when we think about things, we as developers or we as technical individuals, we like to take an application and break it into its parts. So we have a data warehouse application, or we have like a data application, or we have an edge application. But we had one major retailer that we're talking with today that is trying to do a dynamic personalization. So the way that they look at it and the way they think about it is, I have an e-commerce site. And in that e-commerce site, I want to dynamically personalize what the user experience is based off of what they're clicking at any given moment, and then based off of everything that they've done with the history in the past. Okay, well, how do I build an application that does that? Well, their developers started by using our EdgeWorkers technology to use JavaScript to capture the clicks and then to send that back to a data warehouse living in one of the hyperscalers. Well, what was the problem? Way too much latency, like way too much latency, especially for a global application with a global user base, just not enough latency to be able to return the personalization within a particular period of time. And so how did they solve it? Well, if I continue to run my data warehouse at the hyperscaler and I create and use this distributed computing layer that Akamai has been talking about, that's kind of in a middle layer, well, I can create data caches. And not only can I create data caches of the user information, I can also put lightweight AI and lightweight computational capabilities living in that layer. So now when the edge layer collects information and sends it back to this kind of middle layer, that middle layer can do the computation, get it back out quickly, and now you have dynamic personalization. So this is where I think it's really cool. It's like I have one application. That application is an e-commerce site, but I'm combining technology running on the edge. I'm combining technology running in a distributed compute layer, and I'm combining technology living at a hyperscaler in order to create that single application. And what I think is cool about that is not only does that show how I think applications are going to be constructed moving forward, where you have pieces living across the continuum, you also have different providers at different pieces. So there is a hyperscaler who is going to continue to do the data warehouse. Akamai is taking the middle and the edge. But there will be applications in the future where Akamai is the edge and somebody else is in the middle, and maybe Linode or somebody else is the application running at the core. So I think that's where it starts to get interesting when we talk about the edge, is not what it does in and of itself, but how it combines itself into the ecosystem to create new possibilities and new types of applications for developers to unlock.
Yeah, no, that's great from that Tim. And again, I mean, I think that really highlights the reality that you think you know what cloud is, but right, there are going to be a lot of different nuances to what that means. So we did get some clarification. So thank you to the folks who clarified in the question answer. So MCN is multi-cloud networking. So folks like Aviatrix and others that are basically swapping out the cloud networking layer and really kind of providing an alternative, in effect, kind of data plane on that front that, kind of uses their own protocol and signaling capabilities and doesn't necessarily use the cloud one, so that you can, have consistency across a variety of different cloud players. So do you guys have any, Linode side, do you have deal with these guys? Is that of interest? Is that, do you think that's not something that's necessary? So do you have a statement on multi-cloud networking technology?
Yeah, I would say I'm happy to take it. So this is an area that we're definitely looking to investigate. So one of the things that we realize is in a multi-cloud environment, you need kind of the interconnects between the clouds in order to be able to get efficiency. Like one of the things that we don't want is to kind of have something come into our cloud and then have to route everything over kind of the open internet to get back to those people. So when we start looking at that, there's a couple of different things that we would be doing. The first is one of the things that we're doing with Linode is putting all of the Linode locations on Akamai's private backbone. So some of those private backbone locations have direct connections and connections into the hyperscalers themselves. We're looking at functionality between providing kind of VPC connectivity back to the hyperscalers as well. And then we're also looking at partnerships in this area in order to be able to provide some of that multi-cloud networking functionality. So at this point, our exact formula, like we realize its importance, we're doing some things in this area, but the exact strategy hasn't been formulated.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. And I don't want to kind of dig, but we do want to address, some of the questions that come in. But what I want to do now is kind of, shift into really the next big area of discussion. And that's, developer friendliness, right? And so just to be clear, right, we've polled and most of our work tends to be with DevOps type folks and application type folks. So, we wanted to make sure that we factored in some questions and got a good understanding of, kind of what some of the key requirements were. And there's a little bit of an eye chart. So you'll get the, the report after, and you'll be able to look at that. But in terms of what the DevOps requirements were, I think that, there was a bunch of things that were clustered at the top, obviously availability being the key one, that's 67%. Security certifications at 57%. That's an interesting one. But fully featured API, CLI, and kind of developer capabilities there. So I want to dig in there, especially with our friends that work, with the developers, right? What does that mean to them, right? When we say, fully featured API, right? What do they have in mind? What do they want it to, make them toast and take them dancing at the end of the day? Or, I mean, is there something very specific that, they're looking for in terms of the, robustness of how they interact with the back-end infrastructure?
I think there's a few parts to this. I think first, like just ease of use. Like, is it easy to use the cloud provider? Like, if I, once I log in, can I, use a CLI to create different resources or to create different instances of something? Like I think all the big ones have a CLI. Linode has a CLI. Being able to create resources from the CLI, I think is a big one. And then just like ease of use. And that includes things like documentation. There's a lot of debate on how important documentation is and when you're building. And I think like having better documentation is definitely a big win for cloud providers. I see Veronica smiling. I think that's like a general consensus, but like documentation is huge for me, especially when I was a developer. And as I continue to learn in different cloud providers, documentation is huge.
Go ahead, Veronica. I know you've got a whole pitch on this one, so take it away.
Just to jump in with documentation discussion, because it's practically my favorite part of everything. I work in COBOL, which is allegedly self-documenting. That's debatable. But one of the biggest things, I take away from this particular section, if you look at the importance of one-click marketplace, and I always have to laugh because one click is never one click. Right. I've yet to see a one click that actually had me clicking the mouse one time. But look at how much more important documentation is for people versus a marketplace of third-party apps. I will always install it myself with good documentation over any sort of one-click marketplace, over any sort of pre-packaged application. I think those of us in development, those of us in system administration, we tend to be averse to the idea of it doing it for us. And really, we want to understand what it is that we're doing. And I know personally, one of the things that brought me into Linode in the first place was, as I was at the very beginning of my system administration career, I saw documentation and it referenced Linode. And that is so important as a funnel in general for any sort of provider. I can't imagine a provider not spending time on documentation. That's just me. But I kind of bear it out.
Well, let's see. I can count at least 3 of them that I've worked on that don't spend nearly as much time on documentation as they really need to, for sure. But to put a point on, Ty, both your and Veronica's point there, it's really, really hard to get applications working, like, period, right? And when you're leveraging other services that come from, whether they're cloud providers or third-party PaaS services or what have you, you're adding complexity to the environment. And when your documentation is not accurate from the standpoint of how the service actually works, I mean, you may as well just walk up to the wall and slam your head into it 50 times, right? Because you sit there and think, it's my code sucks. Why can't I get this to work? Why I can't get this to work? And you figure it out. And then you finally, and again, like most developers, right? You're only going to ask support under total duress. Like, oh my God, I can't figure this out. And I burned like 30 hours trying to work it out. And I still am. So you finally ask and they go, oh, we changed that like 2 weeks ago. And then you go and bang your head against the wall 50 more times, right? Because you wasted 30 hours when you could have asked right away. And maybe that's just me. I don't know, but
No,
again,
that goes back to the whole like ease of use and developer experience. If it's not easy to use, I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna, it should be easy. That the developer experience aspect of that is huge.
You bet.
A huge chunk of ease of use is documentation. Like I'm reminded of the spiral bound notebooks that you used to get with, I work with legacy tech, so I have like a Commodore 64, and the actual notebook of instructions for it was an actual notebook, and they had to explain things to people. And, that's really how we learn. That's how we develop stuff. And sometimes when that's missing, it's really hard to feel like I can stay with a provider. And that's just me, but I have a feeling that's a lot of people.
Yeah. So let's dig into one of those. Sean, I'm going to direct this one at you, right? So one of the ones that were listed closest to the bottom, right? Kind of industry competitive hardware resources. Right. When you're talking to customers, how many of them are saying I need this kind of specific GPU or I need a Mac or I need, something like that? Because, some other platform providers may talk about having, 200 different, types of processors and compute options that they may have. Is there really that much nuance between, those specific compute things from where you sit? And again, is that really, only 32%, say that makes a difference to them? Is that kind of consistent with your discussions?
Yeah, so I would say that it's consistent within verticals or use cases. So for example, if we're talking about like general web applications, so we've noticed that for the majority of customers who are doing kind of general web development or general web application, there's a very broad set of SKUs or a handful of SKUs that you could really provide from a computing capability that will handle 95 to 96% of those use cases. I think where we've seen things, at least in our early discussions, change is if I go into a financial institution or if I go into a bank, the SKU and have a conversation, the SKUs that we provide today work really, really well for the majority of the applications that we're looking to provide. And now that I think about it, even from like when they're looking to do kind of databases, some of the high memory applications work really, our SKUs have been working well there. I think where we get into the variance is when you get into gaming and media customers. So media workflow has a very specific use case. Gaming and kind of what you need to do to run a gaming engine and render a gaming engine is a very specific type of a use case. And so those are the areas where we start seeing the need for more customized compute. Now, what's interesting is that like in a transcoding for video, for example, what we'll see is they have a tendency to prefer GPU as opposed to some of the more generic SKUs. But like once you narrow in on, okay, well, you need GPU, it's a pretty narrow set of GPU capabilities they need. So it's not like you need a dozen GPU type SKUs in order to be able to service that customer. You need maybe 3 or 4. And then if you add another 1 or 2 for gaming, you've covered a big swath of the market. So you will find different needs based off of different applications. But even then, I don't think you need quite the amount of options that some of the hyperscalers are providing today to solve the needs.
Yeah, you bet. So we got a couple minutes left. I want to, hit on this next slide and one specifically, close to the bottom of the ranking, right? What factors do you consider before moving all a part of your workload to a new cloud infrastructure provider? And portability and cloud agnostic, right? That was ranked pretty much last, from the standpoint of the developers, that was there. But, Talia, you certainly had made a point before about, kind of not wanting to get locked into, these environments. And that's one of the things that really appeals to, kind of the developers that you're working towards. We talked a little bit about serverless, right? And how that, is really a closed system. So when you're, moving towards a serverless based application, it's the Hotel California, right? You can check out, but you can never leave, that kind of thing. So again, just if you can kind of expand a little bit on, why, your customers, view that as pretty important and really maybe even some of the use cases where, folks do want to migrate, some of their applications and workloads, between cloud providers, that would be great.
Yeah, so just in terms of like when I was at AWS, I was on the serverless team as a DA, and one of the things that they pushed for at AWS was more of like a serverless first approach, where with serverless, for those of you who haven't used it before, it's more of a pay for what you use, automatic scaling. You don't manage the servers, AWS manages them for you. So there's an equivalent of that in Google and in Azure, but the setup and the transferring workloads is not equivalent at all. There's a lot of different configurations and different things that go into each cloud provider. So I think once you start building serverless on AWS, it's hard to move it to Google or to Azure, just because there's it's different resources, it's different tooling. I think that's why multi-cloud is becoming more of a thing, because you might have a server running here or a database running somewhere else. So just having that multi-cloud support, I think, is really an important factor. This is actually surprising that multi-cloud was on the bottom of this. And then in terms of like serverless versus server computing, I think it's just all about control. Like with serverless, you have less control about what's going on. And I know Veronica touched on this earlier, that like with when you're using serverless, you have less control of what's going on, and you don't really have a lot of transparency into what your instances are doing. And on the other side, sometimes you don't want that control. Sometimes it's okay to say like, okay, I just want to focus on my business logic, and everything else, can be managed by the cloud provider. So I think it's just about that balance of control.
Yep, that makes sense from that standpoint. One other thing, and then we'll kind of do parting shots, right? Supports core primitives and managed services, right? Supports open source and third-party tools. So, I mean, I guess, it strikes me as developers have a choice in terms of, again, kind of the closed ecosystem versus, support of openness, right? And I don't know that these are mutually exclusive. I think that you can certainly make decisions, based upon the specific application or the workload that you're, really handling and thinking about from that standpoint. But it does strike me as something that you want to go in with your eyes open, right? And I think that, kind of a lot of organizations embark on their cloud journey. They don't exactly know what it is. Somebody told them they needed to do it, and it may have come from the finance department. But ultimately, they have to start, understanding, if this is going to be my strategic platform, this is what it's going to look like. This is what my characteristics for migration and portability. These are the software components and primitives that I need to be able to support. And you again, probably maintain a handful of providers that can meet those needs. And then you figure out what workload, makes sense on which specific platform. Do I have that all washed up, guys, or does that seem like a reasonable way to think about the the decision process?
That makes sense to me.
No, we finally hit consensus an hour into this. We're finally, either that or you guys are exhausted, so you're just like, stop barking at me, New York guy. Let's wrap things up. So with that, I think we hit pretty much all the questions that were in there. Sean had a couple of them in the Q&A. So as we're wrapping up, I think we got a minute left before we hand it off to Cody. Any parting shots, guys, that you wanted to relay to anybody?
No parting shots, but just thank everybody for taking the time to dial in. What is this, modem days? Yeah. To log in and to listen.
I'll concur with that. So Cody, come back, my friend. Let's see. I know you got some wrapping up to do and some gift cards. We're going to give out. And again, thanks to everybody for participating today.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike, and Veronica, Talia, Sean. Thank you all so much for joining us as well. We really appreciate the time that you take out of your busy schedules to join us for these panels. So I would love to remind our audience that this session was recorded. So following this panel, you'll receive an email with a link to access that recording on demand, or you can find it living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars, and just be sure to look in the on-demand section. So Mike alluded to 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, and we're going to give those away right now. Our first winner is Tara J. Our second winner is Chiffon S. Our third winner is Srini R. Our fourth and final winner is Denise J. So to our 4 winners, congratulations. Please keep an eye on your email inbox to claim that gift card. But if you don't happen to see that email, please do check your spam folder. I would like to thank Linode and Akamai for sponsoring today's program. And to our audience, thank each and every one of you for being here with us. We appreciate you spending the past hour with us, and we do just want to ask for one more minute, as right after we close out, a survey will pop up on your screen, and we'd really like to hear your feedback on today's program. Otherwise, we do hope to see everyone at an upcoming Techstrong Learning program. And as you'll see on the screen right now, we do have DevOps Experience coming up a month from yesterday, so please do sign up for that. Everyone, have a great rest of your day.